Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Tonight we're going to hear about Flags of Our Father by John Bradley, and here's Mr. Vallely to tell us about it.
Well done. Well done. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I am under a death threat to stay behind the podium because of the camera. So if I suddenly move and then behave in a very herky-jerky fashion and come wandering back over here, it has nothing whatsoever to do with anything other than the death threat. All right. My name is Vallely, John Vallely. Please don't call me professor or anything like that. If you have questions, I'm simply John. A couple of people in here I recognize. Some people from Civil War talks I've given, so I'll have to remember that Iwo Jima has nothing to do with Vallely and vice versa. Usually when I speak about something from the Second World War, I like to take a quick poll of the class, of the people, just to see how many of them are familiar with the terms or the events. But I have a problem with this audience in that most of you are far too young to have experienced anything of the Second World War or indeed anything of the 1940s and 50s. Yeah, y'all pay me money when you leave. Okay. What I'd like to do is just a quick show of hands, if you will. How many of you don't really know anything at all about Iwo Jima? Great, a bunch of specialists. Thanks, Joe. Thanks a lot. How many of you were alive and of age in the 1940s? Yeah. Iwo Jima is...
Define of age.
Define of age, I will not. You see all the gray in my hair? I earned it, sir. Well, what I'm going to do tonight is just a quick, brief kind of run-through of this thing called Iwo Jima. Maybe just a little bit as to the effect I believe it had on us, has on us as a people. And then we'll kind of kick it around for questions and answers. Notice I didn't ask you if you've read the book, because I've been teaching college students in the United States of America far too long to ask if you've read the book, because I just assume that you're intimately knowledgeable about every aspect of it. Okay? All right. What I want to do here is we're going to talk about something called Operation Detachment, which is a spectacularly boring name for an event that touched America in a way very few other parts of the Second World War did. Operation Detachment is the attack on the island of Iwo Jima. Okay? The book, Flags of Our Fathers, is concerned about primarily 6 young Americans, 5 Marines, and 1 United States Navy medical corpsman. For those of you that don't know, the Marine Corps is a fantastic organization, but it needs the Navy to do just about anything beyond simply carrying a rifle. And one of those things it needs people to be medical corpsmen. And I already angered some people, but I got some smiles from some Navy veterans over there. Okay. So there's 5 Marines and 1 sailor are the predominant actors in Flags of Our Fathers. But the event itself, Iwo Jima, just a moment about that. I won't begin with American-Japanese rivalry in the Pacific. Suffice it to say, obviously there is a war going on. There is a war that not nearly as threatening to the United States as the war against the Germans was. The Germans we regarded as the main enemy because Germany's industrial potential, its location in Europe, made it far more of a threat to the United States. Japan, with the stunning exception of the attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, Japan never represented a threat to America proper, to our colony in the Philippines, to American possessions in the Pacific, most definitely a threat. Japan didn't have the industrial potential to really represent as large a threat as Germany did to us. Okay? So we kind of, Admiral King accepted most of the United States planning was to defeat Germany first and then turn on Japan. But the United States then quickly learned that with its industrial potential, it had enough to literally wage war against both countries without putting one on hold while the other war was waged. So the war in the Pacific, beginning with the Battle of Coral Sea, and then the most significant Battle of Midway in June 1942, the war in the Pacific takes a very different turn. We are no longer on the defensive after Midway. When Japanese carriers, 4 are sunk, we lose 1, and Japan cannot replace the carriers, or more importantly, the trained naval air crew. And then the United States is on the offensive, an offensive that begins with the island of Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands, which was truly a bloodbath, but yet the United States, the losses between Japan and the United States were 20-1, 20 Japanese killed for every 1 American. So it was a bloodbath, but nonetheless, that's the kind of exchange that American sailors, soldiers, Marines, airmen were quite comfortable with. The American offensive took place going up from Australia, heading towards what would be the Philippines, and also came east, the island hopping campaign, where the Marine Corps figured prominently. I would be willing to bet, ladies and gentlemen, if I had $100 in my hand and walked out into the library tonight and asked how many people knew the United States Army was involved in the war in the Pacific, and I'd give them $100 if they could name me one campaign, I'd never have to spend the money. The war in the Pacific is a Marine war. Well, of course it wasn't, but to most Americans, that's the memory of it. It was a Marine war, and that war meant island hopping, which essentially meant an attack against an enemy fortified island. Okay? Island hopping. Amphibious warfare. That means you take your infantrymen, Marines, on board transport ships, you take them to an enemy beach, and you send them against enemy bunkers, pillboxes, guns. Okay? It is a spectacularly difficult and dangerous military operation. By now, the United States Marine Corps can do it in its sleep. The United States Marine Corps still practices amphibious warfare for God knows what reason. Because there hasn't been any successful amphibious attacks since 1982. No one in their right mind would do such a thing. But in the 1940s, it is cutting edge in planning and in technology. And we do it quite well. We never lost an amphibious attack against the Japanese. Never lost. Some were in doubt, perhaps, small p there, but never lost. Never lost. Beginning with Guadalcanal, beginning actually with Tarawa, 76 hours of sheer unadorned hell for the United States Marines and terrifically bad planning by the Marines and Navy. The Marine Corps began that island hopping movement across the Pacific, resulting in victory after victory. Then came the attack on the Philippines. Following the successful attack on the Philippines, the United States Navy, United States Army, United States Marine Corps then had to plan, what do we do next? And that's where Iwo Jima comes in. That's where Iwo Jima comes in. Iwo Jima is a place, military history kicks up these places that are absolutely of no significance whatsoever. There is no reason in God's green earth that the worst day in our history takes place at a little Hoople town of Sharpsburg, Maryland in 1862, the Battle of Antietam. The worst day in our history. Many of you have never heard of it. Worst day in our history. There's no reason that Gettysburg, Pennsylvania has to be this 3-day horror in the American Civil War. Okay? And ladies and gentlemen, who in their right mind would give blood for Iwo Jima? Nothing even grows there. Of what potential, of what value is it? Well, it's a value as an airfield. It's a value as an airfield. The United States Army Air Force, now the United States Air Force, after we took the Mariana Islands, the United States Army Air Force was mounting a very successful long-range bombing campaign against Japan, the B-29 bombers, the most amazing piston engine aircraft ever produced. These 60-ton airplanes had extremely long legs. They could fly back and forth from Saipan, Tinian, Guam, and the Marianas to Japan. It was 3,000 miles round trip, drop 5 tons of bombs, and bring the 11 men home. 60-ton aircraft with 4 engines. But the engines were a problem, remained a problem of the B-29 for some time. The United States Army Air Force commander, a man named General Henry Arnold, nicknamed Hap, went to the United States Navy and said, basically, we need to take Iwo Jima. This is taking all this planning, you understand, and capsulizing it into about 3 sentences. Arnold, the Army Air Force, wanted Iwo Jima. Wanted Iwo Jima because The fighters based, Japanese fighters based in Iwo Jima could and did successfully attack the B-29 bases in the Marianas. And a number of B-29s were hit and destroyed. Okay, that ended in December 1944, but the airmen didn't forget that. Also, there was radar in Iwo Jima. There was felt the radar was giving early warning to Japan when the B-29 bombers were coming. And also there was potentially a Japanese fighter base on Iwo Jima that could destroy the B-29s. Okay? Henry Arnold was, I believe, easy for me to be a Monday morning quarterback. That's the great thing about an historian. We all know better because we've had like 60 years to digest the information. But Henry Arnold believed he was still fighting a war in Europe, where the German single-engine interceptor was such a deadly threat to American four-engine bombers. The Japanese fighter force was never as serious a threat as the German Luftwaffe was. But Arnold had to prepare against the Japanese fighter force, so Iwo Jima had to be taken. Radar and airfield and Japanese attacks. Also, the B-29s to return to the Marianas, those hundreds of miles, if they have engine trouble, or if there are critically wounded men on board, or if the aircraft itself is in danger after absorbing damage over Japan, there had to be an emergency landing strip, Iwo Jima. Also, you need a place to base escort fighters. That incredible P-51 Mustang single-engine American fighter, they could be based at Iwo Jima where they could escort the bombers. As it turns out, that really wasn't needed at all, but you had to plan for it. It's not a Marine Corps idea to take Iwo Jima, not a Navy plan. The Navy was very reluctant, very reluctant. The Marines essentially weren't really consulted. The Navy, when they first heard of Iwo Jima, the Navy put forward the plan to have shells equipped with poison gas and fire them at Iwo Jima. The President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, felt the press would not necessarily be kind about this. This was handing the enemy a propaganda weapon, handing the enemy a great public relations tool. So he argued, he said no, and of course that's the end of that. When the Navy was faced with landing these American Marines on a hostile shore, in an island which they knew was extremely well defended. Now, Iwo Jima is, give or take the mileage here, 700 miles south of Tokyo, 700 miles north of Guam, 625 miles north of Saipan. There will be a test on this. You will be quizzed on this. It's about 5 miles long and about 2.5 miles wide. That is roughly 1/3 the size of Manhattan. Okay, roughly 1/3 the size of Manhattan. It is shaped curiously like a pork chop, with the 546-foot high Mount Suribachi on one end. Mount Suribachi, the United States Marines quickly nicknamed Mount Son of a Bitchy. Yeah. I didn't make that. Mount Suribachi is on the southern end of the island. Think of it as the handle on the pork chop. Okay? And then the ground in front of this Suribachi is relatively low level. Okay? Relatively clear. And then as you continue to go east on the island, there's a series of plateaus. Think of the island essentially in layers that slowly build up. Okay? And in these plateau areas, there are any number of natural caves, hundreds of them. As it continues to build to the eastern tip of the island, there are 4 towns, which were towns literally in name only, a few shacks. These 1,400 civilians had been removed by the Japanese when the Americans were coming. And the entire island, literally, the entire island was honeycombed with tunnels. We had absolute total command of the air, total command of the sea. Japanese Air Force, Japanese Navy was of no threat to us whatsoever. So if the enemy has complete command of the air, what you learn, as all of our opponents since 1945 have learned, you learn how to dig. North Koreans learned how to dig, the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese learned how to dig. Okay? Our present opponents in the desert, digging is a little more difficult, fortunately for American aircraft. They did. I have seen references to Japanese tunnels in Iwo Jima that range between 5 and 11 miles tunnels. A lot of information about Iwo Jima is pretty inexact because most of the tunnels were sealed, and the Japanese were essentially suffocated or starved to death inside them. This was the American tactic, okay, when they weren't burned out or shot. Okay, so we still don't know, and Japanese records did not survive the war. The ground in Iwo Jima is essentially volcanic ash. Iwo Jima, translated from the Japanese, means sulfur island. Those of you that have smelled sulfur, it's an awful smell. A lot like rotten eggs. The climate, on the other hand, for February 1945, it's rather cold, between 50 and 70 degrees, and it's not supposed to rain, but it frequently did at Iwo Jima. So we always have this image of Marines fighting their way through tropical jungle islands, but Iwo Jima was actually kind of chilly. But the ground itself, the ash, was very hot. It was very difficult. If you wanted to sit down or lay down, which anybody in their right mind would be doing, you would take C-ration boxes and you would cut them up and you would lay on the boxes to keep the heat from burning your skin. If you see color films of the Marines in Iwo Jima, you'll see this rather peculiar kind of markings on their faces. That's the volcanic ash. It looks very odd when you first see it. You think something's the matter with the camera. No water. There had been some vegetation on the island, but American aerial bombardment for 6 weeks before and the Navy bombardment of 3 days before essentially burned off anything, destroyed anything that grew. The Japanese tried to grow some food crops there, but it just didn't work. The Japanese had to collect water by cisterns, by putting buckets out to catch rain. Okay? Japan was in no way had the logistics support, medical, food, anything else that the United States had. Japan is fighting the war very much on the cheap. Their soldiers were literally starving. Ours were very well fed in comparison. Americans always have prided themselves on that. To counter the expected American attack, the Japanese began to dig. Most of the soldiers were actually rather poorly trained. The 109th Division under General Kobayashi, which I know I mispronounced. I always do with Japanese. Those roughly 21,000 men dug in preparation for the Americans coming. Tunnel after tunnel, bunker after bunker. At one point, a Marine officer said, quote, "Iwo Jima is the most strongly defended piece of terrain ever." You can never accuse the United States Marines of exaggerating. Never. The most strongly defended piece of terrain ever. Well, the man was there, I'll take his word for it, but Marines do exaggerate. It was a supremely defended position. One tunnel that was measured was 800 yards long, with 14 different entrances, 2 battalion command posts, rather significant, lights and telephones. And that 800-yard long tunnel, this is not straight, this curves and cuts. So an explosion in the tunnel, if it's straight, the shrapnel simply just goes straight down and eliminates anything in its way, whereas if it has a number of traverses, you will be protected against it. 800 yards long. There were a number of hills aside from Suribachi with the romantic names by meters, by feet. Hill 362, Hill 382, etc. One area in particular was known as the Meat Grinder, nicknamed by Marines, Meat Grinder for the obvious reason. And then there's Suribachi. Suribachi was literally riddled with caves, natural caves and man-made caves. It has been estimated that Suribachi alone had 1,000 gun positions. I don't know what to make of these statistics. A gun position could be one Japanese rifle pointing through a small hole where the man would be standing with a tunnel behind him, and he had the hole to shoot through. That's one gun, and his field of fire would be very, very limited. Other positions would be more open. But 1,000. If we're off by half here, that's still 500 gun positions. Suribachi is some 546 feet high, and there's no vegetation. And so if you're walking up Suribachi, you're a target. Okay? At one point, one area near Hill 362 was measured as having 800 bunkers in a position 1,000 yards long and 200 yards deep. 800 bunkers. Some of them with reinforced concrete, others just made with that ash, which is very loose. but yet you can, of course, with concrete reinforcement, make it strong, make it very, very strong. The commander at Iwo Jima was a brilliant officer. One Marine general regarded Kobayashi as probably the best officer that the Japanese had. And the comment ended by saying, thank God there was only one like him. The normal Japanese tactic had been when the Marines land, that you immediately launch as many offensive actions against the Marines as you can. Both sides regarded the others as racially inferior. Okay? We are used to having white Americans turned racist. The Japanese were as racist towards the Americans as the white Americans were towards the Japanese. The Japanese regarded the American as an individual who was weak, dominated by a culture that was at best suspect. Indeed, we allowed our women to smoke. No, this was a large deal to the Japanese. The idea that our women, look how that sounds. But that American women were allowed freedoms, which nowadays most American women would regard, my God, that's all they were allowed to do? But to the Japanese, this was a shock. Public dancing, public immorality. We were weak as a result of that. Many people depict Americans that way. We, of course, regard the Japanese as quote-unquote monkeys. Okay? They can't make anything good. They all have difficulty with their vision. Indeed, the pre-war estimate is Japanese make lousy fighter pilots because their moms carried them in these baskets, and that interfered with their ability to fly, to walk properly. Nonsense like that. Nonsense like that. Kobayashi said that there will be no suicide attacks. He essentially had the Japanese forces on Iwo Jima dig into the island. So when the Marines attacked, they could not see an enemy. The enemy was underground. If you think of it, ladies and gentlemen, you have some 70,000 men on top of the ground trying to kill about 21,000 men below ground. That's an astonishing thing to try and imagine. Imagine just ants swarming over an apple, okay? And what's inside the apple is trying to kill the ants, and the ants just swarming around that. That's a very terrible way to make that clear. But some students, sometimes I thought, they've actually gotten a handle on that, because we cannot imagine people trying to break in or destroy what's inside something, and the people on the inside not coming out, but just shooting out at those that are outside. It's almost like a bad piece of science fiction. But that's what it is. That's what it is. The United States Marines totaled 71,300 men, commanded by a rather interesting individual named Holland M. Smith, whose nickname, of course, was Howlin' Mad. Howlin' Mad had a difficulty with the United States Army, but that's another talk. Holland M. Smith was a very skilled amphibious warfare officer. He had a temper, like, I just can't believe it, but he was a skilled officer. The Navy Command, Admiral Raymond Spruance, and the Amphibious Force commanded by Admiral Turner, these are two very accomplished professionals, as was Smith by this time. The attack itself, under Smith's command, is Lieutenant General Harry Schmidt, and without going into too much detail, we have three divisions. The 4th Marine Division, commanded by Clifton Cates, who later became Commandant of the Marine Corps. The 5th Division, commanded by Keller Rocky. That sounds like a Hollywood name, doesn't it? And the 3rd Division, the division in reserve, commanded by Graves Erskine. Okay? Each Marine division is superbly equipped. All Marines are volunteers. Not all these Marines were veterans. The 4th Division, under Clifton Cates, had a number of veteran Marines. The 5th Division had a number of green troops augmented by veterans and ex-para-Marines, parachute Marines, paratroopers, who were put into the division to kind of flesh it out. And the 3rd Division, that was in reserve, had a number of veteran troops. That is a total of 8 regiments. The 9th Regiment, the 3rd Regiment, 3rd Marines of the 3rd Division won't go into action. It won't go into action. It's based in reserve and never really used. Totaling 71,300 men. The Japanese are roughly 20,933. 13,586 are soldiers, 7,347 are sailors. A number of them are ex-Air Force personnel in the Army or Navy Air Forces, who are drafted in. Some are civilians. They got drafted, yeah. Okay. The Japanese are by and large mostly green troops. Mostly green troops. Okay. The Americans have some experience. In terms of command, I would say the command is about equal, but the Japanese Commander Kobayashi is a brilliant officer. And again, the Americans have unlimited supplies of everything. Medicine, it doesn't matter. Fill in any of the characteristics of a country at war. Japan didn't have enough, and we had more than enough. Much more than enough. Operation Detachment begins at 9 o'clock in the morning, February 19, 1945. First Marines hit the beach about 0859, about 1 minute of 9. They hit the beach. The two divisions that land on the beaches find that they're very, very congested very quickly. There's not a lot of space on these beaches. You need a beach that is wide, a beach that doesn't give the enemy too much in the way of a defensive advantage, and you need enough room on the beach to be able to bring wheeled vehicles in and to be able to move inland as quickly as possible. The surf is very difficult around Iwo Jima. It's a very nasty surf, and the coxswain, the pilots of the landing craft, these short, very peculiar vessels that the U.S. Invented and perfected, had difficult times getting ashore. Any wheeled vehicle or tracked vehicle quickly bogged down the volcanic ash. One Marine said it was like digging in a bucket of wheat. As soon as you moved a spadeful out of the way, it just came right together again. The only way to get any protection was in shell holes by the United States bombardment or from the air, from the sea. That was the only way to find any cover. So when the Marines landed, what they landed in this very superbly defended position that they had been warned would be very difficult, there was no Japanese gunfire. Just imagine these poor young men between the ages of 17 and 22, young men landing on the beach and not being greeted by gunfire. There were a few shots fired, I'm sure of that. But all the accounts say it was very quiet, very quiet. It lasted that way, some accounts say, until 11 o'clock in the morning. This was the Japanese plan. Get them on the beach. Get them bunched up, very densely packed in. We know moving off this beach would be very, very difficult. If a man just put his boot on the ground, the boot would sink in some cases up to the knee in certain parts of the island. Movement is very slow. Wait for them to essentially be a very large target, and at 11 o'clock in the morning, give or take, the Japanese opened fire from positions the Marines could not see. If you can't see it, you can't kill it. The Navy and the air immediately responded to Marine calls for help, but what would happen, as I presume the movie will bring out, the Clint Eastwood movie, which, by the way, was filmed where? Iceland, yeah. Go figure that. Try and imagine selling that to the studio. Hey, Mr. Eastwood, I got a great place for this movie, Iceland. Yeah. What's the response? Well, Greenland was busy? Yeah. But I know people stationed in the Naval Hospital up there that it's now closed that said, yeah, it's very true. But at any rate, in the movie, it should point out that for the gun to fire, machine gun, rifle, or artillery piece, for it to fire, simply the opening in the cave, in the bunker, would be pulled up, and the gun would go out and fire, and then be closed. Very difficult to see the weapon that fired. You could see a gun flash, but then you have to get the coordinates to the artillery or to your gunners, and then you have to shut it down. It was almost impossible to do it. Indeed, bombardments throughout World War II, bombardments of fortified positions, rarely resulted in mammoth enemy death. Rarely resulted. They disrupted their lives, their supply system, but it didn't winkle them out. To get them out, what you needed, the great American expression from the current war in Iraq, you need boots on the ground. You need the infantry. The poor bloody infantry always has that job. And the American Marines had to then go forward in very, very small teams of riflemen, machine gunners, and, God bless them, the flamethrower. The flamethrower is a man who, unlike me, I wouldn't volunteer for this, who's carrying essentially a large container of liquid fire on his back. And as he goes forward with this, it almost looks as if in a modern day setting, you're spraying trees with chemicals. He goes forward. If he is hit by a rifle bullet, he explodes. But what he will do is he will shoot flame into an enemy bunker, into a slit in the cave. Flame will go in there. Flame does two things. It burns you and it sucks the oxygen out of the air. Three things, excuse me. And it explodes ammunition. It explodes ammunition. So this is essentially the Marine object, is to go yard by yard, attempting to find these positions and then to kill the position. Frequently, Japanese forces would hold their fire. Marines would go past them. And then the support troops coming up, the Japanese would open fire on them. This was a long-standing maneuver by the Japanese. Every American Marine knew about this, but knowledge is one thing and then reality is another. It quickly became a very, very difficult contest, and Marine casualties quickly added up. We would lose 3,000 Marines in the first 4 days. Now, when I say lose, it's not always dead. The majority of those who are casualties are wounded men. But then getting them off the beach and then to the naval vessels offshore, that's a very difficult undertaking, taking many men to do it. And the American medics that landed in Iwo Jima had learned their lesson, and they violated the Geneva Convention in so learning that lesson. At Guadalcanal, when we first came in contact with Japanese soldiers, the medic would have the Red Cross on his helmet and an armband. Well, frequently that was simply an aiming point. Everybody knows that if you shoot the doctor, the wounded don't get cared for, morale plummets. Okay, soldiers like their wounded to be taken care of. Okay, so kill the medic. So American medics would land at Iwo Jima with carbines and 45s. They'd have a pistol with them, an automatic weapon. But of course, their prime job is to assist the wounded. And that's where we first come across Mr. Brady, medical hospital corpsman Bradley, in the book. He wins the Navy Cross. A perfect time to mention what a medic does. He was a man roughly 50 yards away from Bradley's father's position on Iwo Jima. The man had been hit, the man was screaming. And in full view of many other Marines, Hospital Corpsman Bradley, naval medic, runs out and positions himself to care for the man. Of course, he's being fired at the entire time. And as he is taking care of the man, he puts his back to the enemy and shields the man with his body. Ladies and gentlemen, I would submit that this is an act of courage the likes of which few people are ever capable. To knowingly do that, consciously make that decision that this person whom you probably don't even know, but this man's life is worth more than yours. And Bradley did it and got the man back to safety. It is said that a number of Marines were crying as they shook this hospital corpsman's hand, patted him on the back. I wouldn't doubt that at all. He got the Navy Cross for that, which is the Navy Marine Corps' second highest decoration. That's the medal that he never mentioned to his son. Marines were bogged down very quickly. What they had to do is they had to move inland. One of the reasons that amphibious warfare is so difficult is you have to strike quickly because there is a large fleet laying right off the shore. And it is your job to take the island fast so that the fleet is not kept tethered to the shoreline to protect and preserve you, because that makes the fleet a sitting duck. That's why Marines accepted casualties that the U.S. Army would never accept it in World War II. Okay? So the fleet is remaining stationary, but the Marines are under orders to move out and to keep on moving. Again, these young men are all volunteers, and they accept the idea that the Marines are the elite and are expected to take the casualties that elite troops take. The 4th and 5th Divisions strike north and east. One regiment, the 28th Marines, heads west, heads towards Suribachi, this 546-foot high hill with a kind of a concave top. And as they head up Suribachi, they take their losses. It will take 3 days before the flag is raised, 4 days before the hill is declared secure. It is an enormous undertaking. It's an expensive undertaking in terms of human life, American and Japanese. The Japanese bunkers that are destroyed there, no Marines or few Marines will go inside. That will be done by flamethrower, grenade, and rifle and machine gun fire. It will be sealed, and then you go on to the next. All of these positions, of course, had interlocking fields of fire, so they could support one another. And there's no cover for the Marines. Can't say that enough. Can't say that enough. There's just no cover for these guys. No cover at all. On the 23rd, Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson of the 28th Marines, the battalion commander, orders that a flag be raised. Some people say the Secretary of the Navy, Forrestal, or other officers ordered the flag to be raised. Well, okay, I'll choose Johnson. He's a lower ranking officer. The flag to be raised on top of Suribachi to send a message to the Marines all over the island that we have taken Suribachi. We've taken Mount Son of a Bitchy. And a platoon under Lieutenant Shirer goes up the hill. Actually make it up the hill. They make it up the hill with very few losses. And up top of the hill, and they have the flag. I've seen it in the Marine Corps Museum. It's about as wide as this podium. It's relatively small. They have a flag, and some Marines get together, and they have a Marine Corps cameraman named, forgive me, Lowry, Lou Lowry. And Lou Lowry takes some photographs, which are real and genuine photographs, which many of you didn't see for years and years. Okay, I know I didn't see them for years and years. When I saw them, I said, "Oh, these are pretty hokey. These aren't real." Well, they're the real ones. They're the real ones, oddly enough. And the Marines all over the island see this tiny flag flying on this flagpole that had been found up there. And one Marine fired and put 2 holes in the flagpole, and they raised it. And it was like being in a ball game. And all over the island, Marines stopped what they were doing, laughed, cheered, whistles. The warships offshore were blowing their whistles. Sailors and Marines just had a great time. There was the American flag flying over Suribachi. Well, it wasn't big enough for some people. Officers have to do something with their lives, and so it was decided that what we need another flag, a bigger one. So there's an American landing craft with the romantic name of LST-799. LST is landing ship tank, or to the sailors, it's large, slow target. And the flag goes down from 799, I believe it was an extra flag, and it's given to a young Marine who hustles it up the hill. Going up the hill with this Marine is a 5.5-foot tall AP, Associated Press cameraman, named Joe Rosenthal. And Joe Rosenthal is about the least military-looking man in the history of the war in the Pacific. Honest to God, you really have to look hard to find somebody who looks like Joe Rosenthal. But Rosenthal was a gamer. He was out to do his job. He saw that flag flying, and he said he was overcome, absolutely overcome. He kept on thinking, what in the name of God did it take for those men to put that flag up here? That was his thought. That was his thought. This is a good man, Rosenthal. And he goes up the hill with, let me make sure I get the names right, went up the hill with photographer Bob Campbell and motion picture cameraman Bill Janost. Okay? Lou Lowry is coming down the hill. And he said to this group, he said, quote, "You're late. The flag's already up, but it's a hell of a view up there. It's a hell of a view up there." Yeah. That's a good line. That's a nice American line. Okay, you're in the middle of a bloody battle. That's a great view. What do you think? Get the old RV and pull it up there. Yeah, that's Americana for you. So up they go, and they have to then take the one flag down and put the other flag up. And Joe Rosenthal, he's a cute guy. He just died at the age of 90. Died August 20th of this year. Died at the age of 90. And Rosenthal was waiting to take a picture of the flag raising. And Janost is sitting there, and he's filming it with this. When you look at the photographs and the films of the motion picture camera, dear God, you compare it to what we have today. Oh my God. So he's standing there trying to film it, and Rosenthal's walking backwards, and he kind of bumps Janost. And he turns and looks at him. He says, "Oh, I'm not in your way, am I?" Something like that. Janost says, No, it's okay. He goes, Joe, look. And Rosenthal turns and sees these 6 people raising another flag. And he doesn't have much time. He just points and clicks. That's the picture. That's the picture. And then he has these same young men stand around and have their pictures taken. And a number of them taking their hat, one man with his hat off, others with their helmets, holding up automatics, holding up their rifles and kind of screaming and yelling and acting like Americans always act when you point a camera at them. Okay? And he takes a number of other photographs. They're posed. These photographs are all posed. The photograph is sent down the hill, taken to Guam, an American base in the Pacific, where it gets there before Lowry's did. Lowry's photographs, the photographs of the first flag raising. Okay? I hesitate to say the real one. Let's just say the first one. And it's sent to Guam, and the photographer's mate, who's developing the picture, that young man realizes that he has a photograph that is just going to set the world on fire. He's just a lowlife, but he knew, and he cropped the photograph to eliminate some of the hilltop. And what we then had sent by what was the state-of-the-art technology there, sent to the main one, is we had that photograph that is featured not just on flags of our fathers, but literally featured in most other things every time you go anywhere in the United States. Okay, everywhere from postage stamps to the world's largest figured monument. And overlooking part of the National Cemetery in Washington. And when the photograph reaches the United States, boom, within days, it's on the front page of American newspapers. Some of you will remember that. I remember the first time I saw the photograph. I was far too young in the World War II, but I remember the first time I saw it. And dear God, it still has that pull, still has that magnetism. Rosenthal was later asked, did you pose this? And he didn't know the photograph was famous. And his first response was, yeah, I posed it. He thought they were talking about the other photographs. He hadn't even seen this one. Yeah, I asked these guys to pose. And that started a little mini scandal that was then taken care of by the people from the Time Life publications and Scripps Howard and everyone else involved with it who said it was a big scandal. You still hear that periodically. But it was taken care of. What Rosenthal meant is he had posed the other photographs. This one, he said he didn't pose. He said you can tell I didn't pose it because you can't see anybody's face. That's the first thing a photographer always does. They want to see the faces. Rosenthal, said that if he had posed it, he would have ruined it. You only see one face in that photograph, and that's in profile. And that's James Bradley's hospital corpsman dad, who's the second man from the right. That's the only face you see in profile. You don't see any of the other faces. Actually, that's part of the beauty of the picture, is these young men, they're every man. Actually, more to the point, they're every American man. They stand for everyone involved in World War II, every American. And that's the beauty of it. Whereas the other pictures, of course, the mother, the wife, the child can pick out dad, husband, grandfather, whatever. And so they're personal, whereas the other is more generic. It's all of us. That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it. No one cheered when the second one went up. No one cheered. No one cheered. Indeed, the individuals involved with raising the first flag were rather bitter about it. And they complained endlessly about the publicity given to the men who had raised the second flag. Bitter men. And I guess any one of us would be too. We'd feel as if we were somewhat shortchanged. Now, all of us in the room know perfectly well that that's when the battle for Iwo Jima ended. Because, of course, the Japanese could look and see the American flag, Americans would be cheering, end the movie. John Wayne gets shot, and off we go. We go home. Yeah. Well, it didn't. It didn't. The taking of Suribachi was simply a small part. Okay? This battle lasted from February 19th, 1945 to March 26th, 1945. You do the math. It did not end when Suribachi was taken. Indeed, the most significant killing in Iwo Jima was after the flag raising. After the flag raising. 3 of these 6 men who raised the flag, of course, will die. They'll be killed. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson, who wanted the flag, keep the Navy from taking it. He will be killed in the meat grinder A Japanese shell will land near him, a mortar shell, and he will disappear. There's nothing to bury. Okay? Nasty death. The family never gets closure. They never get to bury their family member. Now, the Air Force had said, we need this island. Well, on March 4th, and the fight's still going on, there's always somebody that's going to try and interfere. And a B-29 bomber named Dynamite. Those of you gentlemen that are too young to remember this, the United States, your grandparents, gentlemen, when they went to war, they took their airplanes and they gave them names that in some cases were rather questionable in terms of their propriety. And they also painted on these aircraft a number of images of the other gender that perhaps you should be discussing with your grandmother and grandfather sometime. Actually, I discussed them with Grandpa when Grandma's out of the room. Some are a little embarrassing, okay? But others are just hysterical. Well, Dynamite is not spelled D-Y-N-A-M-I-T-E. Dynamite is the woman's first name, Dinah, D-I-N-A-H, space, and the next word, might, M-I-G-H-T. And I will leave it up to all of your filthy minds what they thought Dinah might do. That's enough of that. Okay, you should all feel a great deal of shame when you go home tonight. All right. Well, Dynamite, a B-29 has a busted fuel valve. That means it's losing aviation fuel. And it can't get back to the Marianas. It can't get back to Saipan. Those 700 plus miles away. So there's a bloody battle going on down there in Iwo Jima. Now what possesses these guys? Dynamite flies over the island of Iwo Jima and announces that it has to land. Now, the Japanese had 2 airfields constructed in Iwo Jima, and they were working on a 3rd one, which went by the poetic names of airfield number 1, 2, and 3. Cute, huh? They had a lot of imagination. So Dynamite had to land. There's a battle going on, and lo and behold, a 60-ton B-29 descends from the skies and lands on Iwo Jima airfield number 1, Motoyama number 1. And it's greeted by cheers by the Marines. Personally, ladies and gentlemen, I think I would be baffled why this lunatic wanted to come on to this island in the first place. But so be it. And what they did is they fixed the valve as best they could, and they hand-loaded the aviation fuel onto that B-29, and that puppy took off as quickly as it could and got the hell out. But the Army Air Force felt that this had been the purpose of the attack. And we are proven correct. We need this island to save the lives of these airmen bombing Japan, which it was hoped would bring Japan to its knees, the bombing campaign. Far more important than the ground campaign. Okay? So we have early evidence that perhaps it's true. Dynamite is our early evidence. I always meant to see if any of these guys wrote a diary about what they felt landing on probably the worst spot on the planet in 1945. I always wondered if they ever kept a diary. They never really did. The American attack continues throughout February into March. It is very slow. It is incredibly bloody. At some points, American Marines are charging across about 100 yards of open ground, airfield number 2. Now, charging is a very romantic term. We always think that somebody will grab their saber lifted high and yell, "Follow me." And the best tradition that the troops will run across. Well, it doesn't work that way. They don't really run very far. They go in fits and starts, a fire maneuver, and it's very, very difficult. And these charges are shut down and pushed back constantly. It's a question of movement here, retreat here. Okay? It's very slow, very cumbersome, and the cost continues to mount. Continues to mount. The people at home are not especially pleased at the cost of these Marine attacks. Indeed, it was felt that the United States Navy should be replaced in command of these island hopping campaigns, and Douglas MacArthur put in charge. MacArthur beat the Japanese, and he beat them at far less cost to American troops than the Navy and the Marines. And conservative press at home in particular wanted these bloodbaths ended. That's part of the beauty of this photograph is it ended, and he talked of replacing the Navy, Admiral Nimitz, with General MacArthur, part of the beauty for the Navy and the Marines. Okay? The battle continues to get the headlines, and the cost continues to rise and rise. One American aircraft carrier, a very small aircraft carrier, the United States Bismarck C, is destroyed. A large carrier is hit. Japanese air forces, though, generally don't bother the American Navy that much. It will not be until March 26, 1945, that the battle is over. The United States Marines declared it was over about a week before. Somebody forgot to tell the Japanese, because the only large-scale banzai attack, suicide attack, was waged by the Japanese the night, March 25th, 26th, when about 300 starving, and in some cases wounded Japanese came out from underground and attacked across one of the American airfields. And what they did is they got into the tents of a number of fighter pilots who were now stationed on the island. The airfields had been improved, and the fighter pilots were stationed there. And most of the fighter pilots, of course, couldn't defend themselves. I mean, they were skilled infantrymen. A number of air crew were attacked. Some 55 Americans were killed, many of them by bayonet and by the Japanese sword. Were killed, and roughly some 300 Japanese were not just killed, but incinerated by flame. And after that, the island essentially was secured. The cost. This is the tough part. Still very difficult for us to imagine. Again, if you get that image of people above ground trying to kill those below ground trying to kill those above ground. The United States Marine Corps lost 6,820 men killed. That's 2.5 times the population of Siena College, where I was. Okay, killed. Okay, many of them, of course, were listed as unknown and they never found the bodies. 19,217 are wounded. Many of these men would grow old in Veterans Administration hospitals. Indeed, many of them will never get out. Okay? Wounded just don't come home magically only carrying a cane. All of us know that. Okay? They're blinded. They lost their legs. They don't come home in the same way they left. That's a grand total of 26,038 killed and wounded out of 71,300. Now, there's an additional cost here, or another set of figures. 2,648 of these Marines are mental casualties. Okay? Combat stress, battle fatigue, shell shock, post-traumatic stress syndrome. It has as many names as there are wars. Okay? This is the thing that George Patton went and slapped and kicked 2 American soldiers for. The brain shut down on 2,648 Marines. They could not take it anymore. Now, what I don't know is and I've never been able to find out if these 2,648 are included in the 19,217 wounded. If they aren't, then take the 26,038 and add almost 2,700 young men to it. The United States Navy will lose 880 killed in action, 1,917 wounded in action. Most of these will be from naval vessels attacked off the coast. But there are 738 medical corpsmen, Navy medics stationed with these 3 Marine divisions. 738 of them, not stationed with them, 738 will be killed or wounded. 738. Japanese had 20,933 men on that island. 1,074 will live. And that, for those of you who know anything at all about World War II, that is an astonishing high percentage of casualties for the Japanese. The Japanese, of course, were raised in the military ethic where to surrender meant to damn yourself to just eternal shame. You fought to the death. If you could not fight to the death, you killed yourself. How true that is in all circumstances, ladies and gentlemen, we do have to ask ourselves. A number of times Americans would shoot Japanese soldiers that were surrendering. They had been ordered to as a means of preventing the Japanese from then pulling a grenade from their possession and throwing it at the Marines who would be holding their fire. Okay? Are these war crimes? Are these stressed out young men who simply are reacting to their fear? I'll leave that for someone else to decide. I can't decide that. But 1,074 out of 20,933. There will be, relying on my memory here, forgive me, there will be 22 U.S. Marines awarded the Medal of Honor. 22. 22. 27 Medals of Honor will be awarded for Iwo Jima. The United States Marine Corps takes a great deal of pleasure in saying 27. 5 Navy corpsmen and 1 landing boat commander. Okay? 1 landing boat commander. The United States Marine Corps is awarded 84 Medals of Honor, frequently miscalled the Congressional Medal of Honor. They're awarded 84 Medals of Honor in World War II. 22 are awarded for the 6 weeks of Iwo Jima. Of that number, 6,821 Marines killed died of wounds. Okay? That's 25% of all United States Marines killed in World War II. The most incredible thing about this, it is still one more battle yet to go. Not Okinawa. Okay? And if I may, boy, did I ever go there. Oh, my God, you all have my apologies. Let me just end with a quick story, and God will forgive me for this, for taking all of your night. I do apologize. But imagine, if you will, this incredibly old guy in front of you as being about 5 or 6 years old, growing up in Philadelphia in the summertime before God invented air conditioning. And it was hot and humid. And my father and all the other men on the block were supposedly outside weeding and cutting the lawn and clipping. Well, you know, they just took the first opportunity, and suddenly the Schmitt's beers were in their hands. And they were all sitting on my family's back porch, hot summer day, a Saturday or Sunday, whatever. And they're throwing the beer down and they're avoiding work. And they're talking about life in general. I'm up in my room, not paying any attention to anything. And then I hear World War II. And of course, I'm a young kid, so the ear goes like this. And I start to listen in. And there's about 6 or 7 men on that porch. And they're all essentially busting on one another, ridiculing one another. What'd you do in the war? Oh, I was in the supply corps. Oh, of course, they all laugh at him and they call him names. And they say, no wonder you're so fat. You were in the supply corps. And one of the men back there, he'd been in the Merchant Marine. Wow, that took about 20 minutes of ridiculing. Hell, I didn't know what the Merchant Marine was. I thought that was some kind of special Marine. Okay, somebody else had said he'd been in the Navy. Well, that's another round of applause for that. And my father said he was in the field artillery, and they all said, what? Can't hear what you say, Joe. Artillerymen are all deaf, aren't they? And that was laughter and applause. And there was one guy who, he was just somebody's father. Come on. All dads look alike when you're a little kid. And he was, I guess, was quiet. I don't remember hearing his voice. And somebody said, what'd you do? And he says, I was in the Marines. Wow. That started Marines. You all know what USMC stands for, don't you?
Many things.
Uncle Sam's Misguided Children. First time I heard that was in Philadelphia a long time ago. And they all started laughing at him. They said, well, what did the press say you did to win the war? And he takes it all in. They're all laughing back and forth. And there's a little bit of a pause, probably why they re-equipped with the beer. They didn't have the cans then, it was all bottles. And I heard that during the conversation, that sound. And then one of these men said to this middle-aged man, said, were you in action? And this Marine, you're never an ex-Marine, you're always a Marine. This Marine said, I was at Iwo Jima. And there was this bloody incredible pause. The back porch shut down. And I heard these men say, well, got to go back to work. Or, can't drink all your beer, Joe. Got to go back to work. And they started going in their respective directions. And I'm looking, and I said to myself, my God, what's he talking about? And so, my father, is he cleaning up the evidence before Mom comes home? And I see the big guy in the kitchen. And I say, Dad, what's the story with Iwo Jima? And he says, well, it was a very bloody battle in the Pacific. And I said, well, I found out about that. I said, to myself, if it shut down the conversation, it had some kind of effect. And I want to find out what it was. It stayed with me all these years. Just as Pearl Harbor, 9/11, the assassination of Kennedy, births of grandchildren, children, deaths in the family. It all stays with us. But we have some common memories as well. 9/11, December 7th, and just that name, that very peculiar name, Iwo Jima, Sulphur Island. I went on far too long. You have my apology. Okay. Those of you that have read the book, throw out some ideas about this, some questions, some comments. Sir?
I haven't read the book. I saw the movie and there was a lot.
You get an F already then. Sitting in the front row too. Usually brown noses sit in the front row.
But there was. Did you see the movie?
Not yet. No.
Okay.
I didn't want to until after this time.
All right. Well, there was more of a focus on the individuals, the Indian fella from New Hampshire.
Hayes and Gaines.
Yeah, and how they were brought
Yeah.
about to sell war bonds, and then is that because you didn't really touch on that?
No, I didn't want to. I wanted to save that for all you guys. I want to give you the background. Yeah, 3 died, 3 lived. Rene Gagnon from New Hampshire, a man who I don't think he ever had a smiling, happy moment in his life. They said he looked like a movie star. He was a good-looking young man when he was in his dress clothes. Ira Hayes, a very unfortunate Pima Indian from Arizona, and John Bradley from Antigua, Wisconsin. Ladies and gentlemen, you win a free trip to Trenton, New Jersey if you can find Antigua, Wisconsin on the map. Okay? These 3 men survived, and by order of President Roosevelt, right before his death, well, not moments before, but shortly before his death, he ordered these 3 men to be brought home to run a war bond drive. Now, the movie portrays the war bond drive as we're taking advantage of these young men. We're marketing them. Wow, ladies and gentlemen, they raised $26.7 billion in that war drive, which was about 40% of the budget for the war at that time. We did not know when this war was going to end. There wasn't anyone who knew this war was going to end because of 2 bombs going off. Everyone knew there was an invasion of Japan coming. That would cost some money. And you also had to keep the American people, who had lost 356,000 young men by the time this war was over. You had to keep them committed to the war, and that meant you used everything at your disposal, which if it meant that you took those 3 young men who did not regard themselves as heroes, and you marketed them, well then by God you did it. Yeah, it's tragic, it's sad, but it made sense. Terrible thing I have to say.
And it worked.
It worked. It worked. The 3 young men in the book, of course, feel as if they are living a lie. Bradley's father kept on saying throughout his life, the heroes are the ones that didn't come home. How many times did this man say that before somebody finally took him at his word? He did not regard what he had done as heroic. He lifted up a flagpole. Never wanted to talk about it. Won the Navy Cross and never told his family. Never told his family. Yeah, they're marketable. Ira Hayes will die drunk, drowned in a mud puddle. 1947, 48. Gagnon will die at the age of 70. He drank. And Bradley will live until the age of 90. He dies in, I believe, 1990, 1994. Forgive me, I forget. And he leads a very, very controlled.
He's an undertaker.
He's a mortician.
He's an undertaker.
And he's a mortician. His father always said about him that my father, he always said of his father, excuse me, he never complained when you get a call on a rainy, cold February night in northern Wisconsin that somebody had a death in the family and he had to go out. He said he'd get up, put on a suit. He's a mortician. You can't go out dressed in a sweater or a t-shirt. You have to be formal. He would go out and his son said he would help the family, bring them closure, begin the funeral process. And the father never spoke of the war. The father ran away from the memories of it. You have to believe the man lived the rest of his life in a very controlled kind of tension. And I do, I never knew the man. Okay, I'll play psychologist here. You almost have to think that when that man finally closed his eyes, it was with some degree of gratitude. Gratitude. There's a case of a young man from New York State, from Oswego, who on the first day at Gettysburg had to leave a friend behind. And the last words he heard the man say were, boys, boys, don't leave me, boys, don't leave me. When the man died in 1885, Gettysburg, July 1863, when he died in 1885, he told his wife on his deathbed that he still regretted having left that man behind. And that's how I think Bradley finally went home. Went home almost pleased. Yeah, it was marketing. The movie portrays it as a big negative, doesn't it? Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. Yeah. Who can understand a war bond drive in the year 2006? For God's sakes, we haven't had our taxes raised, and we've been in war since March 2003. It's a different world.
China's going to that.
China's going to that. Yes, sir.
You're a pretty brave man going to Bonaventures and teaching at Siena. But I was a corpsman in World War II. I spent 4 days in Iwo.
Welcome home, sir.
Thank you. Well, the only American that some of those Japs knew was Babe Ruth and Corman, because there was a price in your head. But that Japanese general, like they say, went to Purdue and an engineer in every pillboxer, every gun placement, had a couple of gun places protecting it. And that island, you mentioned one thing I didn't hear you say. You could not dig a foxhole. If you tried to dig and the damn thing would come down.
Hey, I said that. You have it on tape. I said that the one Marine was quoted as saying it's like digging in a bucket of wheat.
Well,
I got you there.
I mean, it's not too friendly saying you ducked behind a couple of dead people, but that's what you did. What was I going to say now? The one thing that impressed me, I saw the movie, I read your book, I saw the movie. When the Marines, they couldn't do it then, but the movie portrayed it correctly. There's two things in the movie that I noticed. The cargo net they put over the side, you go down a cargo net, you don't go down a cargo net like you're down a ladder. You get one strand and you go down to one strand. Now, when you leave that cargo net, the Higgins boat is going like this, and you better leave it when it's going down instead of up, or you can break your ankle. And that's another thing. The other thing that I saw that it was pretty well. I mean, the scenery was good and everything up in Iceland, but the other thing I saw was, if I can remember it, it shows the battle wagons. The battle wagons, they use them to bombard the place before the Marines and everybody went ashore. But it showed they got a gun together on Iwo and they hit one of the battle wagons. That would never happen because they're out 15, 18 months. They're not going to get hit by ground fire. So.
Yeah, well, that's Hollywood.
But if you had $50, I'd claim it because I was a Saipan and how Mad Smith and the other Smith. When the Marines would go in 3 miles and say it's secure, at night the Japs would come out and start digging. When the Army within 1 mile, you could have a picnic. So they fought different ways.
Very different ways.
And
different
that's what you were up against.
Very different ways. Yeah. Can I get a Semper Fi for the crowd for a Marine veteran? Boy, did I step in the den, didn't I? I can't even get you applause without getting
Every once in a blue moon, I'll be a Marine, and playing golf or something. He said, "Where were you?" I said, "In the Navy." "What was your rank?" I said, "I was a corpsman." My God, the guy, he lights up, and it's a difference.
You never have to buy a drink as a corpsman.
You don't have to buy a drink.
Everybody notice it? Yes, sir. Mr. Papa.
Did the Japanese know this was going to become the critical island, or did they fortify all the islands?
Oh, they had fortified a number of islands we bypassed. The most significant being Truk, T-R-U-K, a major Japanese base. Rabaul was another one. That island hopping meant essentially if you could avoid it, you avoided it. There were Chichijima, which is near Iwo Jima, north of Iwo Jima, I think, correct me, it might be south, the mine goes, was extremely well fortified. The Japanese, you're playing a guessing game, but essentially if you're being bombed for 6 weeks, you know they're coming. Although we did the same thing in the Normandy campaign, we bombed all over France, so they were kept guessing. Yeah, but by and large, these guys, they knew how we operated, they knew about the importance of airfields, and everybody was able to make fairly intelligent guesses. And the Japanese didn't know it would be a critical battle. Their whole point is just killing Americans. Because again, we're weak, The more of us you kill, the more reluctant we will be to continue the war, and we will ask our government for peace. The more we kill, the more they will ask. The Japanese fought to die. Again, that's courageous. That's honorable. You fight to die. You say goodbye to your family when you draft. Sir?
The Marines found out early in the war to take no quarter. The Guadalcanal, for example, was where they learned they would find some of their soldiers, tied up to coconut trees, with their eyes poked out and their genitals, So, later, or then through the course of the war, I think you had even mentioned it, neither side took prisoners.
Neither side made it a habit of taking prisoners.
Yeah.
There are a number of very touching circumstances where the young man, say from Indiana, confronts the young man from Kyoto, and they do, that common humanity wins out, but it was few and far between. We treated the Germans and the Italians an awful lot better than the Japanese. We did feel, a number of Marines, soldiers and sailors did feel that to protect yourself you had to kill them. But on the other hand, now this is going to bother some people here, you had a man named Louis Chesty Puller, who is on film before the invasion of Peleliu, a disastrous Marine attack that never should have happened. He is saying into the microphone, he's saying, if you have to go to any trouble to take a Jap prisoner, then don't take him. Now that's a Major General. I'm sorry, he wasn't Major General at that time. This is a Marine hero telling you not to take prisoners. This is a total war, ladies and gentlemen. There's no humorous stories in total war. Okay? This is total war.
There's even a film, you see it many a time, like on the History Channel. I'm not sure why. It's a tropical island. It was probably Tarawa, where a Japanese comes out of a bunker with his hands up, and the Marine just shoots him. It's on film. I'm sure that was probably censored for a while.
He didn't show. As a matter of fact, it was very rare you didn't see pictures of dead Americans. The first 3 dead Americans, photographs shown in World War II on a beach at New Guinea, and they were swollen soldiers. And Roosevelt himself had to say, you can show the photograph. So yeah, you would have shown that. You would have shown that. Especially because you can identify faces. Yeah. So
I may have the numbers wrong, but Tarawa, there were about 5,000-6,000 Japanese and 900. Was it 900 or 900? Okay, I was wrong.
The United States Marine Corps lost heavily at Tarawa. It took 76 hours.
900 dead and 76.
In the tropics.
How many Japanese were left?
Oh, how many survivors?
Yeah,
19?
Oh,
19 survived?
Yeah, 9 or 19, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, right, that's in the book itself, when you started reading it, how many of you have read or seen the movie Field of Dreams? Isn't that thing about, shoeless Joe Jackson, all it's supposed to be about baseball? I remember reading that book and saying, yeah, this is about baseball. I like baseball. Let's go Mets. Hell, I'm a Phillies fan. I'm reading this, and at the end of the book, I find out it's not about baseball at all. It's about one man, young boy, trying to find his father. Well, the father's dead, and the young boy is now in his 40s. Okay? Goodbye Darkness by William Manchester. Incredibly finely written book about a Marine in World War II, Manchester, United States Marine in World War II. He goes back to the Pacific in the 1960s and 70s, and then he writes about the battles and his own experiences. William Manchester's father was a Marine in World War I and grievously wounded. And he spent all of his adult life getting on his son's nerves with continually throwing out, I'm a real man. I went to war and I got wounded. What the hell have you done, boy? And Manchester is wounded in Okinawa. And his first thought is he's laying there. First thought is, there, Dad. Gotcha. Okay? Both those books are about a young man searching for his father. As I was reading Flags of Our Fathers, I got the impression this man, Bradley, he's writing about these 6 men. Actually, he's looking for Dad. this father that would always have the family say, whenever somebody called on the anniversary of the flag raising, somebody would call, he would always say, tell them I'm going fishing in Canada. It became a family joke. Where's Dad? Going fishing in Canada. But they would always say that with great straight face, and nobody ever got to interview him. Rarely spoke about it. A couple of interviews, that's about it. He didn't trust the press. He thought they just dramatized it, made himself out to be a hero, and he did not feel he was. But the son always had difficulty getting a relationship with him. Dad dies, and they look in this cigar box, and they find the Navy Cross, and they find mementos of his life in the Pacific War. And Bradley says, I have to go find my father. I couldn't help but get the impression that I was reading a book for the third time. The author Kinsella, the author Manchester, and now the author Bradley. And then you finally get to one part of the book. If you haven't read it, I don't want to ruin it for you, but there's a good friend of his with the nickname of Iggy. And Iggy is captured by the Japanese, and terrible things happen to this young boy. And the man that has to go in and identify the body is his best friend, the Navy corpsman named Bradley. And that, I think, at that point, so the son says, that's when Bradley shut down. That's when that brain just clicked off. And he couldn't take much more after that. Couldn't take much more. And so Bradley was denied a father. He had a man he could look up to, but he didn't have a man he could relate to. And so that was his mission in life. And oddly enough, his father never said a word in the book about the torture, murder of his good friend Iggy. But there was an interview that was published a couple of months ago where Bradley, typical, the son wants to get in touch with his father. So what does the son do? He goes up to his father when the son's about 22, and James Bradley says to John Bradley, he says, hey, Dad, mind if I go to Japan?
I invited him to Japan.
So Dad sits there, and Dad's comment was, the war's been over for a long time. So he goes. And what does he do? He brings home a Japanese girlfriend. No, that's fine. You fall in love. Who cares? Who cares about color and all that and race? You fall in love, you fall in love. Brings home a Japanese girlfriend, and he wonders, how's Dad going to take this? I think the kid's pushing the envelope myself, but that's okay. And he introduces, it's not in the book, I don't believe.
It's not in the book.
He introduces the young girl to his dad when they're at a lake vacation place. And the girl's English is superb. And then he has to go back inside and say to help mom with dinner, something, I don't know. And this young Japanese woman, whose knowledge of Iwo Jima is probably as bad as most Americans is of Iwo Jima, she's out there alone with Hospital Corpsman Bradley, who's now in middle age. And what are they talking about? He tells her about Iggy. He tells her about his best friend, who's pulled into a Japanese bunker and tortured to death, mangled, brutally murdered. He tells her. And she says that he told her in a very matter-of-fact tone. Yeah, what do you think of the message? I don't think it'll be that bad. Okay. Then after half an hour, he goes back to the house. And the son, James Bradley, comes running out there and says to the girlfriend, Look, how'd you like Dad? She goes, oh, he was very nice. She doesn't tell the son about the conversation. He meets her after the book is published. They don't know or anything. But he sees her a couple of years later after this book is published, and he says, what'd you think of the book? And she said, it was really good, except that one thing about that torture victim. You didn't know about that? And he said, no. And I said, well, your father told me about that. That summer about the lake. And Bradley goes, huh? Can't believe it. Can't believe it. He said, yeah. And he said, well, why didn't you mention that to me? And she said, well, the way he talked, I just thought people knew all about it. Now, there's a couple of different layers. There's a lot of layers to the ground in Iwo Jima. There's a couple of different layers to this Hospital Corpsman ground that make him to be a very, very appealing and sympathetic man. He finally had to tell someone, and he told a young Japanese woman. Why did he tell her? Yeah. It's interesting. Why didn't he go out drinking with some of his friends and just have it all pour out of him at that point? Bradley said at one point he was interviewing Marines and sailors who had known his father, and he kept on calling this one man. The man refused to speak to him. And finally he just kept on saying, listen, I've heard all the stories, but I just want your story. whatever. And finally the guy said, all right, call me at 1 o'clock tomorrow. And the next day, Bradley called him, and at 1 o'clock, this now old Marine spoke almost nonstop for 45 minutes and told him about his father and told him about Iwo Jima. And at the end of it, the man was in tears. And Bradley said, I cried with other Marines. And he hung up the phone with this guy and took his dog for a long walk by the water in Wisconsin so that he could kind of recover from it. So everybody deals with this PTSD, whatever you want to call it. Everyone deals with it in their own way. Be it bottled up, be it spoken about, be it laughing over beers in the back porch. It gets out little by little. And the human being begins to recover from it. Bradley's father spent years after the war, nightmares every night, waking up, the bed sheet was soaked. Bradley's wife had a difficult war too. She had to be with this man, and she loved him, and she stayed with him. And all the time, he kept a secret from his family. He didn't want his family to know. Protecting them, protecting himself, I don't know. Those of you that haven't read it, it's a really fine book. And you learn about these 6 young men, all of them dirt poor, grew up in the Depression. Depression too. I mean, those people my age, young people in the audience, what does it mean? Come on. We're depressed if we don't have 2 cars, and how many television sets in the house, cable TV, We're depressed if we don't have cable. The Depression molded these young men and brought them into a world which was tough. And to survive, they had to, I believe they had to operate more as a group than as the individuals. That's my Monday morning quarterbacking. And then off they go to war. And they leave families behind that have to grapple and deal with this tension. Harlan Block's mother, who sees the photograph and says, that's Harlan. You can't see his face. The rest of the family's looking at it going, oh, no, that's Harlan. And it was Harlan. Harlan will die, I think a week later, at Iwo Jima. Okay? And there stands that money. There stands that money. Somebody asked me, was Iwo Jima worth it? Somebody asked.
How many airplane crews were saved?
30,000.
Sir, that's not true. The grand total of 3,011 B-29 bombers were built between 1943 and 1946. The war ended in 1945. The United States Army Air Force, in its official history, says 2,411 landed, emergency landings at Iwo Jima. Okay, now if I may just use a statistic or two, just so I have it right. 402 B-29s fell out of the sky for one reason or another, shot down, hit by an aircraft fire, or just crashed, operation losses. Okay, the United States Army Air Force, by the end of World War II in the Pacific, had 972 B-17s. 972. 402 were shot down. 3,000 were produced. I ask you, how could 2,400 land in Iwo Jima? Because they had to land for training, or they had to land for some kind of damage to the aircraft, fuel problems. Statistically, it doesn't make sense. It can't be. You can make an argument. I'm not so sure I want to make it, but an argument is made that Iwo Jima to the Army Air Force was a viable target. But in actuality, it did not serve what the Army Air Force wanted. The 6 B-51 squadrons based there flew very few escort missions over Japan. The headwinds were too strong. Pilots couldn't take 9 hours in the air. They just couldn't do it. As a B-29 base, as a fighter base, Iwo Jima did not work out. That number of 2,411 aircraft includes all planes that landed there in training missions. In some cases, squadrons would continue to land and take off from Iwo Jima, and that might account for, say, 12 to 16 planes in a squadron. That's part of the ones counted. there's some problems with figures here. That is a story that has yet to be written. But the more important, I think, the value of Iwo Jima is it represented a great deal to the American people, to the 16 million men and women in uniform, to 156 million Americans, to the Allied cause. That flag raising, this beautiful photograph, it's impossible to look at it and be neutral. It represents closure to the war in the Pacific, pride. It represents a little piece of emotion in us that looks at the photograph of these faceless men, and they stand as symbol. They stand as symbol to me. I hate to be romantic and sentimental about it, but they stand as symbol to me, the 2,400 that froze to death at Valley Forge. They stand for those young men at Iwo Jima. They stand for the 8th Air Force over Schweinfurt. They stand for Hawaii in 1968 in South Vietnam. They stand right now for Baghdad. It works for me. It works for me. So, I think this is the last one, because Jim has to stand.
Do we know the names of the men who put up the first flag? Or
Yeah.
they just fade away?
No, we have all their names. Many of them are identified in the photograph. Many of them also ended the war in, many men were wounded, quite a number were killed. But as a matter of fact, I saw an interview with one of the young men who was waving his cloth hat. And somebody asked me, says, "Man, it's Iwo Jima, you're on top of Mount Suribachi. What are you doing with a hat on, you moron? Why aren't you wearing a tin pot?" He goes, "Hey, they were just never comfortable." Oh, okay. Yeah. Also, that's a perfect piece of Americana right there. Interesting enough, in the one picture which is posed by Rosenthal, there's about 15 Americans standing by this flag, and the only one in shadow is John Bradley. The only one in shadow. Now, come on. You can make a lot of that if you know what happened to the man afterwards. But I like to think that that's Bradley. Doesn't want to stand out. Wants to retire and be behind it.
One of the problems with Lowry as opposed to Rosenthal was Lowry was a Marine Corps.
He was Marine,
was a
yeah.
Marine Corps photographer.
So it was slower getting out.
Whereas Rosenthal's picture just clears
Yeah.
AP wires
Yeah.
almost instantly.
Yeah. And thankfully, because I have it hanging in my study at home.
Oh, we all. Anybody who was in the Marine Corps can tell you that is the Marine Corps.
Well, actually, there's one person who would say that's the Navy and the Marine Corps.
That's an old trivia. That's an old trivia question too. How many Marines raised the flag at Suribachi?
There's one man over there would say that actually it was the sailor, that the Marines were just getting away to hog the photograph.
They would say that, yes.
Harry Truman said of the United States Marine Corps, they have a better propaganda machine than Joe Stalin. Mr. Nash, are we done?
Unless there's any more questions.
Just one,
Sir.
if I would mention, the posed pictures, where it shows whatever 20 or 25 of the fellas. I think it's the one where you're saying that John Bradley is in shadow. You look at the soldiers, at the Marines, and they're armed to the teeth. In fact, there's one picture where the one guy has his gun. I don't know if it's a rifle or,
Sir,
an
infantry soldier never carries
No,
a
I
rifle.
know.
He has a rifle or a weapon.
Right.
I'm going to ask your wife to slap
But as I say, I'm just pointing out how they're, I mean, it was only the third day of the battle or fourth,
And if you notice, sir, none of them have a backpack. None of them are carrying any weapon. They're carrying ammunition and their weapon. And a lot of cigarettes.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I spoke too long, speak out, my apologies. If you didn't vote, you
gotta have
shame
more.
yourself.
You gotta have more.
Thank you very much, and I wish you well. You haven't read the book? Read it. Read the bloody thing.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.